34. Barendiel vomited again, and Celendriel held him, muscles straining to support her brother's weight. His legs buckled, and they both fell and skinned their knees. 20 minutes had passed since Celendriel had pushed Mirthendir from her brother's mind, and, while the physical symptoms were fading, his mind would not be whole for some time, if ever. He was dehydrated and starving. Had she not found him, he would soon have died. "How did you find me?" His voice cracked with pain and regret.
"We'll talk about that later. Now we need to get you to the spire. We must warn Garthaniel and assemble the rangers." He took her face into his hands and stared into her eyes. He had no mental gifts, being a man of purely physical prowess, but she felt his gaze pierce into her. "You removed the blocks, didn't you?" She looked down, and worry built in both his expression and in his mind. "I had to. It was the only way to find you, to save you." "What will it do to you, sister?" "We will talk about it later." She slipped her hands under his arm and helped him to his feet. For a moment, her brother's legendary stubbornness took a hold of him, but then he nodded and let her lead the way. "Did you ever sense it in him?" "No." She went silent for a moment, trying to process the feelings raging through her. "They must have taken him when the two of you were in the outside world. He never let me get close once you returned. He claimed he had moved on from me." She paused, pain pushing her lips up in a wry smile. "Did you know I haven't even touched him since he's been back? Not a single hug, no sisterly peck on the cheek, not even the slightest touch on his arm in 7 years. He must have known that I would sense it." "The temple in Gypt," Barendiel said in shock. "The one where we found the dwellers in the dark. We were separated for days, and they must have taken him then, made him prime." "He is not prime. He is something else. Something worse."
Barendiel opened his mouth, and then, unsure what to say, closed it again. The siblings walked in silence for several long minutes before a cool breeze flowed over them. They rounded a corner and saw the end of the tunnel and the green of the sward beyond it. As they emerged, Barendiel took a deep breath, as if the fresh air would cleanse away the stains in his mind.
"How did he take you?" Celendriel asked.
"I tracked the dwellers in the dark into the catacombs." She looked at him, a mix of worry and anger. "I know I should have told someone, but I did not know who to trust. At least one of them is a ranger." A look of shock crossed Celendriel's face.
"Are you sure?"
Barendiel nodded, and she could see regret dig into him. He pushed it away and continued. "I found their temple, the place where you found me." He paused. "It is ancient. I cannot believe they have been down there all this time, hidden among us. How could they?"
"Do not try to understand zealotry, little brother. There is no logic at work in their madness."
He nodded, but comfort did not ease the stress in his shoulders. "They were performing a ceremony when Mirthendir, or the creature he has become, arrived. He took control of them, and then they came for me. I ran, trying to get the word out, but they caught me, and he pushed himself into my mind. He made me forget
I do not remember how many days ago this was. Then he let me go, and I lived my life, unaware that he'd placed something inside me, a switch he could turn whenever he wanted.
Celendriel did not need her abilities to understand what her brother now feared.
When he flipped that switch, I was no longer me. I felt like a passenger on a long journey drifting in and out of sleep. Sometimes I remembered the journey, other times I did not. But there were others there with me. He used my adventure company perk to control them.
The dwellers. Berendiel nodded as they took the last few steps from the catacombs into the clear dawn sky. The air was crisp and cool, and the grass was slick with dew. A slight breeze wafted down from the mountains and flowed through Berendiel's hair. His eyes glistened with unshed tears, and he turned to Celendriel.
Did I?
Even if you did, it was not you, not your fault. She pulled his head onto her shoulder, and he wept. She was unsure how long she'd comforted him when a single horn blast split the morning air. It was a sound not heard in Sylvan Anor in millennia.
Da Torim,
Berendiel said in alarm, and they both ran to the avenue, the long, wide thoroughfare that led from the deep water through the town and the sward and all the way to the gates of the spire. Across the water, as the sun crested the mountains behind them, the towers of Dar Torim pushed through the ground, greeting the morning light for the first time in millennia. A few seconds later, another horn blast rumbled from high atop the spire. All across Sylvan Anor, people ran from doors and rushed to windows. Among them was Gartheniel, the steward of Sylvan Anor, who had slept precious few hours these last several days. He arrived at the gates of the spire just as Berendiel and Celendriel reached them.
"Assemble the rangers," Berendiel said, "and arm every able-bodied man and woman. We are being called to our great purpose."
Gartheniel's eyes flew from Berendiel to his sister, and she nodded. To his credit, Gartheniel asked none of the hundreds of questions that must have been burning his lips, and instead turned, snapping orders to attendants and guards alike. People scattered, making the city ready for war. "You are in no shape to lead this fight," Celendriel said.
"I am the captain of the Rangers of Sylvan Anor, and I will do my duty."
Celendriel stared at her brother, a mixture of fear and pride on her face. She could no more talk her brother from this decision than a tossed pebble could slow a river. She nodded and yelled for a healer. Then she turned back to him. "Well then, I'm going with you." Berendiel opened his mouth to protest, and then closed it.
"You always were more stubborn than me."
She looked across the sparkling deep water to the dozens of towers poking from the mountain on the far side. She had spent her entire life staring at that mountain, dreading the day when the vision in her mind became a reality. She looked on that vision now. What happens today will decide the fate of all the realms.